some things are really tedious, when you're like trying to make something sound a particular way.
Right.
Just like, squinting like on your like, Logic or Pro Tools or whatever it is that you might use. And you're just kind of like trying to get, something to sound right, or like doing multiple takes. That's not exactly the most fun aspect of like making music, but shredding on the drums and like trying to just be as Dave Grohl as possible, that's definitely fun, and I think it's very cathartic at the moment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. What instruments are you playing on your solo album?
So on solo record, I played guitar and bass and vocals. I sung, obviously, and synth. And my friend Dave Zaberka played all the drums amazingly.
So you're doing all the lead guitar too. You're playing the all the Hendrixy solos, like on Blue Wave and some of the other songs.
Yeah, that's all me. So
oh, great, man!
This guitar right here, which is my little axe. This guy.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. I've got my amp all sort of set up here, so I can actually blast things if I really want to. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's got a nice chunky tone.
Yeah, it's an old 60s amp, so it's like just straight into the amp, and it has like a vibro kind of like.
Yeah. I love the ending chord too. That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed with your stuff, I've been listening to the album a couple times over the last few days. Really, really enjoyed it. It's got a lot of sort of like 60s sensibilities, some like psychedelic sounds, but modern production. Like there's some, like on Blue Wave, it starts off with just such a nice low end. But you also have a lot of interesting, more dramatic chord movements than is sometimes heard in kind of groove music. Like, is the 60s a big inspiration for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you're enjoying the record and stuff. That obviously, that means everything. And I'll have to send one out to you as well, because I've got the vinyl here. So I'll send one to you. Yeah. I mean, I love the 60s. But I'm also like quite particular about what I actually sort of like in music from the 60s. I wouldn't say I kind of like everything.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I feel like a lot of the inspiration for me comes from like music from the 50s.
Okay.
Like, you said like that chord at the end. You're like, oh, I like that chord. Like that's straight up like from an old Elvis song, because they had that weird kind of like jazz influence in rock and roll still. And yeah, but I mean, I love all of that world. But yeah, also similarly, as beautiful as some of the production is at that time, and like that song like Sandman or something, it's like a very kind of typical sounding production at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Still like quite a lot of limitations, and yeah, also because like I think hip hop wasn't a thing yet, so like the influence of bottom end and like bass and subwoofers and like all of that, just like they didn't have the speakers nor the kind of dub or anything like that, so often the bottom end is not very like cool. So I always like I'm always kind of like I listen to a lot of hip hop and 90s hip hop just because I love the sounds of like the kicks and the snares. So the oomph, yeah, I like that's what this kind of like.
Yeah, well, shall we talk about these video game moments? I really like the idea you had about this peace in video games. And I mean, who couldn't use peace in this year we've had?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so like we were just talking about it in email world, and like obviously, people are spending more time indoors probably now than ever, and I think that, we talk about the virtual space all the time, and often, like, to be fair, like quite negatively, I would say. But yeah, like, this sort of concept that I sometimes find myself arriving at, like, especially playing some video games, is like this state of, like, this Zen state, you know? And the question is, like, can Zen kind of exist within the virtual world, in that sort of virtual space? And I think if it was going to exist anywhere, it would probably be like, you would see it flourishing in video games. And I think it definitely has, yeah.
When you first mentioned that in the email, I thought of when I was a kid and I would be sitting on the ground, cross-legged playing video games. And every once in a while I would get into this state where I felt like I was floating, where it's almost like your equilibrium kind of adjusts, and I would just kind of sit in that moment. And I don't know if it had to do with being cross-legged or just kind of your brain being so into the game, so it's kind of tricking it in a way of how you're moving. I haven't really had that moment as an adult. Maybe it's just a different way, like we are as we get older, or it's harder to get back to that relaxed state, or maybe it's just from sitting on the floor. But that was the first thing I thought of, is kind of going to that almost like a flow Zen state.
Sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think as well, that engagement on that sort of that level. I mean, we remember. I mean, I do remember the 90s, but I was pretty little, like, throughout. Like, I do remember it. And things were definitely less connected then. So kind of, I was talking about it with my brother, and we were talking about what our rules would be for our kids if we were to have kids. And I would say, look, I think video games are cool. There's nothing wrong with kids playing video games, but I would probably try and keep them off sort of the online video game world for a certain period of time. If you're playing an old Nintendo and it's just the Nintendo plugged into the TV, there's no one else really in it. It's not, other people coming in. It's just you and that sort of thing. So it is like there's a crazy, like, sense of discipline, and I've never made that connection you're saying, like, even sitting on the floor with your legs crossed. I mean, that's kind of definitely, I think, what could trigger an almost meditative kind of state. But I was like, I thought, for people as well, maybe listening, might be worth kind of just looking at like what Zen is, because I don't pretend to be any expert, but the dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, says it describes it as a Japanese school of Mahayana Buddhism, emphasizing the value of meditation and intuition rather than ritual worship or study of scriptures.
Oh, interesting.
That's the first definition. And then the second definition is kind of to use it as an adjective, which is like peaceful and calm. And the example is, she's kind and relaxed with a very Zen energy about her. So I was like, okay, there's definitely some crossover, I mean, I think it has to be said as well that, like, the video game industry, particularly Nintendo, is like, it's predominantly Japanese. I don't think there's any coincidence in that at all. I think I would assume, I wonder if any of the makers have ever been asked that question, like if Miyamoto has ever been asked, what value do you see in the sort of the meditative Zen moments in video games? Because that would be a great question. Because
well, for sure.
I think he thinks about it. I mean, I hazard a guess that he considers it.
Yeah, well, Miyamoto, he said in a few interviews about how he spent a lot of his childhood exploring caves and forests. And when you think of a lot of Japan, the urban centers are so dense, so densely packed, and there's so much stimulation that you could see how they would really treasure that those differences between the ultra intense urban environments and then try to find those moments of peace and relaxation when you're living in smaller homes and you're more cramped.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he always had, similarly, I remember reading something. I mean, there's no, Miyamoto's obviously a genius, and he's like, and genius translates across any sort of thing. I mean, he could be considered, a sort of Mozart or like a Haydn or, one of those sorts of characters that just sort of creates this whole world that everyone then kind of, plays with, essentially. That's like a classical musician, or some of, you could probably say like the Beatles or something. He's like a video game Beatle or something. And I find it also funny that he also plays music. He plays guitar and he plays banjo and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I remember he said that he always, he was designing games at the time where everything was space. It was all kind of spaceships and like aliens, and it was very inhumane in a way. And the idea of like Mario as a character in the original Donkey Kong arcade was like a very obviously human, recognizable character. And he has this like, he's total like an empath, like a humanist, and they say that the argument was that like that was what actually led to the success of it, was that it was relatable on a human level.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, and when you look at Mario too, he's not a superhero. He's not muscular. He's like a working class. He's got a guy with a mustache. He's got his little working hat on and his suspenders. And the enemy is not an alien or a robot. It's like the most human animal around. A big giant gorilla. It's stronger. It could crush him, and it has an intimidation and power, but it's still this really organic and
emotional.
Yeah, totally.
Like an emotional motive. It's aggressive. Like
It's
not just cold. Like, because it was like Space Invaders, so it was like, it's like, why are they invade? Like, who kind of, what's the motive?
Yeah, they could be coming down to give us technology and to speak to us, and we're just like, blow them out of the sky.
Exactly, they're just trying to say hi. But yeah, so then I sort of was thinking about like examples, and you mentioned like bringing up some examples, and I think it's a difficult like it's a difficult sort of thing to really sort of specify, because you're describing like nothingness in a game, like this sense of real kind of ambience, really, like, and then it's the appreciation that you feel from the ambience, So it's like the real example I could think of was Mario 64, and throughout the whole castle sequence, there's always the kind of overture just sort of playing on loop, and obviously, graphically things are a little bit more limited then, but it's still like quite like a vast game. It has like a vastness to it. And I remember when it came out, like I was maybe five or six, and like it just like, I remember the sort of camera pan and it became 3D, and my brother and I were both just like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's a real like whoa moment. But I always think that like what's really interesting about that game is that it's really isolated. The whole experience is like this really, like, 2-player was never an option. It's like there's no other kind of character in it. I mean, you see kind of Yoshi right towards the end, and there's a few other like little kind of moments, Easter eggs, if you will. But it's pretty much like, it's almost like an Odyssey, for a lack of a better word, but like it's very internal, and there's like a psychological element to it, I think, without a doubt, And I the example of when you're outside of the castle and you're just walking around, there's no music. It's just pure ambience and just bird song. And you're just and you're in this fixed kind of graphic state. And the weather doesn't change, nothing, the graphics don't move. There's a stillness. There's the sound of like the water from the moat and and bird song. And that's it. And you just kind of like walk around. And it's kind of like very kind of, you can feel the endorphins of like your body just kind of relaxing as you kind of play it.
And there's no enemies. There's no way. I mean, you could drown, but there's no pits that you could fall into. Nothing's going to come and attack you. You can walk away for hours and you'll come back and he'll just be sleeping, but there's no time limit.
Yeah, totally. There's no time limit. Can't die. There's no nothing. It's just this sort of infinite kind of thing. And for the time, I mean, like, people still had games with points and stuff, you know, like it would have been very kind of like, whoa, you know. And then, you know, you go into the castle and then it's all the sort of the stars and the paintings and all that kind of stuff to do. But there's still there's still definitely like Zen moments throughout that game, like the cathedral, the sunken ship level, you know. But also, I mean, I think I mentioned it in the email, was, you know, when you go into the back courtyard and again, you know, after you've been through the castle and you're sort of walking around, the music's playing and there's lots of kind of stimuli and lots of stuff. And then you go into the back courtyard and then there's just these ghosts that don't really move that much. And all of the music dissipates. And then you've got like the bird song again. And it's just it's an interesting like decision for them to be like, no, we don't want any music. This is just, you know, a quiet moment, you know. So yeah.
Well, it definitely feels really intentional because, I mean, it makes sense to have a safer space as you first approach the castle, but then to have something like you're saying where you go back, you see these ghosts, you think there's going to be trouble, you think there's going to be enemies, and it fades away, no music, and it's just kind of another extra spot where, yeah, he can just completely relax.
Yeah, and there's the way to get into that level there and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's incredibly passive. I mean, there's so much like restraint that, you know, they would have had this new technology, this ability to like make 3D games for the first time, but they really just like pulled back quite a lot so that the player could kind of just enjoy the virtual space. And I think it's definitely something to be said about that kind of, there must be a Zen thing to it. And I can feel it, you know, for sure. And then, yeah, did you have any?
Yeah, I wrote down about 5 of them, and then I asked our community as well if they wanted to suggest them, so we can throw in some of theirs, but maybe about halfway through at the end. One I was thinking of is in The Last of Us Part 1 now. The game is divided up into usually 2 sections. You're either hiding and going through these really dangerous urban environments that are dark, claustrophobic. There's zombies all around you. If you get seen, you're usually murdered right away. You're constantly like struggling to survive, and it's scary. I remember when I played it, I was like really tense all the time. And then usually once you come out of those dangerous environments, it transitions to when you're walking in the outside world where nature has taken over. There's green everywhere. The sun's coming through. There's no enemies, and the characters start talking, and the story is revealed through these quiet moments, and you know that, okay, this is going to be a relaxing moment, at least for a little while, and I can totally unclench, and now I'm completely ready to hear the story now that I can enjoy it. Because I find with games, I don't like the games that start off and they try to hit you over the head with a lot of story. I love it when you get immersed with movement and controlling the character, because that's what the game is. It's not a movie. You have to be one with the character before I start caring about the story. And then once I've had that bit of action, then I'm really happy to sort of unclench. It's the same thing with music, comedy, everything. It's all about that like tension and release. And I think that game does a really good job of really dividing its gameplay up into 2 sections of extreme tension, extreme release.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's like, it's kind of cool. I mean, tension and release, but also, I mean, we talk about like rhythm, you know, the sort of like the on and off and the high tide and the low tide, and seeing the 2 of them, the way they interact with each other. I've always sort of thought that, you know, the way that you could think of video games and how you might make an album, it's similar, like your like sequence of songs, like you have a track that sort of introduces the world and might introduce some of the themes or things that how you might engage, and then, you know, the next song, which could be considered like the next world or the next stage, engages further, and then the following engages further, but then by the fourth track you might pull back again.
Yeah.
And then sort of have something a little bit more ambient, or because you've already sort of gone with people pretty, you've taken people on a journey, so you want to kind of give them almost a bit of a break. And then like typically from like a vinyl point of view, like it's normally 4 or 5 tracks aside kind of thing, maybe more depending on how long they are, maybe less. So like the turning point of like 5 as a 5th track is normally like that's the inner track, and normally that you could think of that as like the middle point in a game, like where you maybe progress, like I don't know where you would describe that in like Breath of the Wild or something, but it would be kind of basic. Maybe when you've got like the Master Sword or something, it's kind of like halfway through the game because you still got like a million shrines to do. You still got X, you still got this, but you kind of established the world.
Yeah, and you've had to get that sword. You've had to go all the way through the Lost Woods, sort of like as far into the unknown at that point as possible, and then you emerge stronger than before with the sword. That's a great example. I like that.
Yeah, it's that game just that kind of blew me away. That was the first Breath of the Wild. I think it's like, I'm sure it is for a lot of people, but I think it might be like my favorite game of all time. I think I've definitely played it more than anything, and I guess I'm not like an online gamer. I don't like have like a monthly subscription to anything. I'm not like, I'm just a guy that has a Switch and grew up with Nintendo in my house,
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm probably pretty like, noobish for lack of a better word. But yeah, amazing game. And there's another good example, which wasn't one I thought of, but that game is like so, the whole thing I think is very spiritual, It's all about spirits and, connecting with, previous lives, and, it's very kind of meditative. I don't even think, they don't even try and like hide the kind of spiritual, and I would say like almost Buddhist kind of element, or like Shinto like elements to the game, with sort of river spirits, dragons, like, it's all that kind of thing. But on the coast, I can't remember the area, but it's that piece of the map that looks like a spiral, and it's like this spiral coast, and you have to. Do you remember where
Are you talking about Eventide Island? Is that the one where they take away all your equipment and it becomes a survival game?
That's amazing, that sequence. That's like, but I'm actually talking about another bit on the map. It's near the Eventide Island. It's this one area. Maybe I can just like look it up. But
does it have is it sort of like a maze where those spirals are really high ceilings?
No, it's just sand.
Oh, okay.
It's the Ritag Zumo Shrine, the Into the Vortex Shrine.
Okay.
You just walk along the sand, and then you have to do it and move through it without and you move through you defeat all the monsters or whatever.
Cool. I don't think I've gotten to that, and I love Breath of the Wild, and I don't think I've been there. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that was the one example that I thought of as well, and this is like a good question. Is the feeling that you get when you play a game like Breath of the Wild, when you hit the thing that says that you've hit out of bounds,
right?
You hit the end map. That feeling.
Okay.
What is like that sense that you have? And you're like, oh, and you're like, and the question is, what's beyond that?
Right.
Which is a very human kind of question, and I mean, we know technologically that there isn't anything, but that idea of like looking at these impossible virtual sunsets, which exist in games like that, which there's no way of ever crossing that, and in the real world, we can sail ships, we can find, keep moving around and around until we double back on ourselves, but in games that have the sandbox where it's like that's it, and that thing, when you hit that point, I think there's like an existential element to that. And particularly in Breath of the Wild, there's like this kind of stillness every point, north, south, east, and west, whenever you hit the out of bounds area. Which, keep in mind, it has nothing to do with playing the game for the sake of beating it or 100%ing it. It's just your own curiosity. It's like penguins just walking off when they get bored kind of thing. It's like, you're just doing it for yourself, and that to me is like the most fascinating thing. And I think there's a peacefulness and there's a calmness to that, because you're questioning the infinite in a way.
With Breath of the Wild, that was another one of the moments I had, and it ties into what I was talking about, having the gameplay up front and then the story. Breath of the Wild has one of the best tutorial sections ever. When you first come out, you put on the clothes, you emerge, and you see this whole world in front of you. And then you do the first 4 shrines that they make you do so that you get all the powers. And then after that, you're on your own. And what I loved about it is that you do all this work, you're learning about the world, you're discovering things along the way. You're not worrying about a mini-map. It's all very natural. It feels like you're just exploring. And then once you've done that and you've played for a few hours, you get to your first sort of little village. It's like a stable or town or something. And by that point, I was totally ready to just relax, where I was like, okay, I've met a lot of enemies. I've messed around with some weapons. I've died a bunch of times. I'm so ready to just literally sit around a fire with these people, roast some apples, or experiment with the food, where I'm not going to die. I'm safe at this campfire. I can totally experiment and come up with crazy combinations, and at that point, I'm receptive to these people's peaceful vibe and learn a bit more about the story.
Yeah, totally. And that the very sort of symbolic bit in the game where you literally leap. You jump off. Yeah. And you're diving into the game. It's very it's very clever. They're like geniuses, man. There's no doubt about it.
Every time I think maybe I'm getting too old for modern video games, and certain games are just kind of like annoying me. I think I can't like a Zelda game anymore. Breath of the Wild came around and totally gave me the same feelings I had when I was the kid first discovering games, and reignited that and showed me that no, there's still games out there. There's just now games have branched off. Like when games first came out in the 80s and 90s, they were all fairly similar, right? A lot of them, it was like very action based, and now there's just so many different ways to play, but you have to find the ones you like. But Breath of the Wild, I'm with you, is definitely, if not my top game of all time, it's definitely up in like the top 5, and definitely the best one I've played in a long time. That just shows me you can still have that sense of wonder and exploration, where you look somewhere on the screen, not a mini map, you look on the screen with your eyes and you go, I wonder what's over there. That looks interesting. And you just go for it, and something's there.
Yeah, totally. That's an incredible, it's an incredible experience. I think also, that sort of golden age, like in the 80s and 90s with video games, I think what was so clever about those games, and the same things kind of happened with music as well, where it's like the amount of personnel that worked on these games that were like hit games was so small. It was like 12 people, 15 people. I think the credits for like, I don't know, Super Mario World, the SNES, which is still a pretty vast game. Probably like maybe 15 people.
Yeah, or you look at like Final Fantasy. I saw a picture of the people who made Final Fantasy VI, and it's just like a class photo. It's a tiny little team. And the amount of connection you can have and vision you can have when it's a smaller team. Like, it must be so hard to make a modern game that has to be gigantic and needs 300 people. How does one person have an idea and get that to everybody? You're doing the backgrounds, you're doing all the objects, you're writing the NPC dialogue. Like, to have all that become cohesive seems so challenging.
Yeah, and for it to have a style, a sort of very tonal kind of style to it, that sort of oversees all of it. It's a masterpiece.
Especially because video games are so different from other mediums, because you have to interact with it. A movie or a music album, you control every second of it. every millisecond of it. And people can interpret it in different ways, but it's going to go start and then end, right? Whereas with a game, you don't know if people are going to try to go out of bounds, or if they're going to go the wrong way, if they're going to like find something more challenging. It's such an interesting medium that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was very particular to like the Nintendo ethos as well, is that they don't actually give you much direction as to how you play with the game. Another good example, and this was like a really great example I thought of the other day, was in Super Mario Galaxy, in the first one, and my friend came over and we were just sort of playing with it on the Wii, and we were, it had like these new sort of game mechanics, and notably was like the physics of it, because it was spherical, truly kind of 3D spaces where you had these small kind of planets that were like this 3D sort of space that you could sort of walk around with. And we worked out that if the planet was the right size, and if you got enough momentum, you could run and do Mario's like sort of 3 jump thing, and then fall into orbit. So you could just orbit the planet without ever actually touching the surface of the planet.
Right.
And you just swing and fall into orbit, so you're always almost about to hit the ground. And I just thought, like, we would just do that for like an hour, just like watching Mario just kind of like move around and orbit this planet and just enjoy the physics. And again, there's no timer, there was nothing, we were just doing it for ourselves. And it really felt like we were actually, you could feel the movement,
right.
The way the camera was in the game, and you could almost like feel the wind in your hair, It was like an incredible sort of experience.
Well, they're masters of the physics feel. I mean, that's why Super Mario Brothers 1 was so popular and successful, was that there's that weight of him running and jumping and the little bit of control you have in the air. Where so many platformers at the time, it's like, they're not jumping high enough, or it's too floaty. But Mario, they always nailed the weight of it. And Mario Galaxy was just such an amazing evolution of what can we do with platforming? And like you say, put it upside down. Those levels where the blocks are going, and as you're going across the platform, the gravity switches to go up and down. So it's like really bending your mind to wrap around those physics. It's just so fun to take those systems and play with them, because you can only do that in a game.
Yeah, exactly. Then another example, which I thought, which is moving away from Nintendo, is a game which is probably one of the first games I can actually sort of remember, and I didn't know how to play it, but my older brother would play on the computer and I would just kind of watch. It's this game called Myst.
Okay, yeah.
Do you remember Myst?
Yeah, it's another one. I remember seeing it. I remember seeing my dad's friend playing it, and it was so different because they used pre-rendered backgrounds. It looked unbelievably detailed and realistic, and it was a puzzle game. So you were just going from screen to screen and trying to find out, what can I even click on? What do you want me to do, game? What needs to go where?
Yeah, that's like that game. I think. Well, the premise of that game is that you're actually stuck inside a book.
Okay.
And you have to you open a book, and then you fall into a book, and then there's 2 characters that are trying to basically convince you to collect their pages of the book. And there's one brother, and there's another, and they're 2 brothers, I think. I'm just trying to remember. And one has like blue pages, and the other one has red pages. So it's a similar kind of like choose your own adventure kind of thing. And you can either believe what the blue page brother guy says, or you can believe what the red page brother guy says. But one of them is actually trying to help you get out of the book, and the other one is actually trying to take advantage of you, so you trade places, ends up leaving the book. That's like the whole premise of it. But it doesn't really give you much more than that. Like, there's no, this is like before like walkthroughs and chat forums, like, you just had this, like you said, like, you try doing something for like 45 minutes, and then all of a sudden you click on something that seems so insignificant, and it moved.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, the pixel hunt of is that an object I can click? Is that part of the background? How I'm supposed to combine the toilet paper roll with the cereal box. Oh, I see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think there was similarly, because they had that rendered graphic thing, and there was this kind of vastness to the game, and I think that like the Zen in the virtual space, returning to the theme, I think you're going to find it more often in games that are like single player, character walking around in soulless,
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of space. I mean, Metroid, I thought of Metroid 3, like I think it's called Corruption, and that game is there's a lonesomeness to it. Like you're just going from planet to planet by yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's a bit of music, but it's for the most part pretty ambient. Like it's just kind of like low, quiet sort of synth noises, and then you'll sort of land somewhere like that. I think that world Odyssey, which is the one with all of the like cable cars and stuff, and then there'll just be this vast kind of like space kind of view, like planets all over. It's huge kind of background, and it definitely. I think it's designed to be quite sort of peaceful, but also quite thought-provoking in a way.
Yeah, the sort of dark side of peacefulness. I remember trying to play the first Metroid on my brother-in-law's Nintendo, and it just scared me too much. I was like, I don't want to be alone in this dark place. You're underground. You don't know where to go. There's no friendly characters in that game, and everything is a mystery of what you're supposed to uncover.
Yeah.
And that's a really magical thing to let people just kind of explore and go back and forth until they sort of come across something that's jumps out at them and find the answer that way.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're kind of losing that with modern games. I feel like they're afraid to lose people's attention span, and they are tending to. They're so scared you're going to miss it that they hit you in the head with it. And they kind of ruin a lot of the sense of exploration.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking to a friend of mine who also plays music, and we were talking about Mario Odyssey.
Yep.
And when it came out, I was like, it's a great game, but there's almost an insecurity to it where it just feels like it's overkill. Like that New Dawn City, which everyone was raving about because it was kind of like this New York vista, and Mario's like walking around, and it felt kind of like a new world for Mario to kind of explore. But it was like this very little piece in the game. It's constantly like the music doesn't sort of stop, and I think that's probably a byproduct of competitiveness, because the industry has blown up so much versus what it was like in the 90s, kind of similar to what you were saying. It's sort of like when you ever go, if you've ever been snorkeling, and you see all of the colors and the reef and all this sort of incredible expression of color, but it's actually like the animals are all competing for attention.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of the point of it. It's like the same as
flowers.
Yeah, or like even the confectionery aisle at 7-Eleven.
That's right.
All the different candies or chip packets or whatever, they're all so brightly colored because they're all trying to stand out for the guy that might have the munchies and just, those brightly colored objects. But then I always think that it's the same with I find with ramen noodles. If you ever go to a Japanese grocery or and you see just the line of instant noodles, and the packaging is so vibrant, and I always think that it's the ones that sometimes just go full minimalistic, ironically, end up standing out.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe that will happen more in games where it's the ambience in the games might sort of come back as a sort of a competitive edge.
Well, it seems like when developers and publishers do put out a big single player game, they tend to, the community at large tends to prop it up and really adores it. I know I wasn't a big fan of Outer Worlds, but I liked the idea they were going for, and people love that. And the latest God of War game and Spider-Man. So there's a lot of examples of them coming out. I mean, when you look at the numbers of what games make money, if you look at how much profit mobile games and online games make, it's compared to what just making a game for a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, it's a miracle they still make the kind of games that we're after. And I'm so grateful that they still continue to make those, because really the money is scarily good in making some kind of like very addictive, same thing like a candy clicker, brightly colored, just something that's going to manipulate somebody's mind. The total opposite of the Zen experiences we're talking about.
Yeah, totally. Well, in defense of Mario Odyssey, I actually did write some examples because I wanted kind of newer examples as well. And in the Wooded Kingdom, they actually did kind of quite consciously...
Great song in that kingdom.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's very sexy, it's very cool. But the music doesn't actually stop until you kind of like move further into the level. But if you go back and then walk along that ledge, and you go around and you find there's like a waterfall.
Okay.
And there's literally a character that says, "Oh, it's so nice to be peaceful and just hear the sound of the waterfall."
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, okay. And there's no music playing. It's like waterfall. And I was like, I feel like maybe this is for people like me that just find the little weird back areas, you know. And yeah, so that was a moment for sure.
I had a similar one to that in Deus Ex Human Revolution. And that game's all about approaching buildings in your own way. Do you want to go in guns blazing? Do you want to hack a terminal? Do you want to lockpick or whatever? And I saw a grate outside in a city hub, and it wasn't a part of any mission at all. And I just like stacked some things and found my way up there and got in. And as I'm like crawling across, there's all these sort of like weird obstacles to get through. There's no enemies, and you just keep going and going and going. And then at the end, you get to this sort of like stockpile of items that is like a lot higher than what you normally find. And it was just totally a moment of the developers put this thing here. Whoever's going to explore is going to get this secret little stash of nice stuff. And it was when you encounter those moments, it kind of feels like you're communicating directly with the developers, and where they're sort of speaking to you. They wrote that just for you. Here's the spot by the waterfall. Here's the spot at the end of the really long, seemingly pointless duct system.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose they're storytellers, and they will look, like you say, for moments. Well, I can't remember the game that you mentioned before, but where it was like there's chaos in the city, and then you sort of come into these green vistas, and that's when the narrative starts playing out. And that's kind of, I guess that's sort of similar in a way. Yeah, what else? Oh yeah, and then I thought of, this is like a classic one, but I think like the rhythm of Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo is like incredible. I mean, like that's just the way that game like moves through, and the music is amazing. And
oh yeah,
they do this thing which I thought was always quite interesting, because a lot of games that were sort of that 2D like side-scrolling thing, they'll have sort of foreground and then some level of background. But Donkey Kong Country, which I think is like one of the first games that I've seen that did this, has like multiple layers to the background. So you really do have like a foreground, middle ground, and then sort of right in the background you might see some of the little palm trees, or and a lot of it was like actual scanned photographs, and they sort of rendered. It was like a weird kind of type of graphic, but it does make you feel incredibly immersed. And they do that thing quite often when if you finish a level and it might be all stormy and rainy to begin with, and then the storm ceases, and then the sun comes up, and then right at the exit point, some butterflies just start turning up.
Right.
And the butterflies are not there. They're not a power-up. They're not a bad guy. They're just there for the ambience, and the sun kind of comes in I always thought that is like a very, and you kind of just want to not even finish the level. You just want to kind of stand there and just enjoy the moment.
And it's something that doesn't need to be there. It's such a beautiful detail where they must have gone back and just kind of, when you're pouring over something, it's like listening back to a song and you think, I really need an egg shaker here or some reverse guitar or something. Like just a little, or let's just pan this from left to right. And it's such a cool moment because not needed, but we're going to put some butterflies, and it just helps with that immersion because you're constantly having sort of like a mix of suspension of disbelief and trying to integrate yourself into this screen and to keep it going and layer it like that. It's just it's quite an achievement. And the music in that series is just, I feel really lucky to have grown up listening to video game music and not appreciating how special it was at the time. We do a top 20 video game music show, and it's our like most popular thing because people just love it. Like they respond to it. Even when games are bad, the music is probably going to be pretty good because there's a lot of great composers, and it's kind of like this generation's like classical music. Perhaps it's really music unlike any other genre.
Yeah, totally. I mean, video game music is. It's a huge part of my life. I was laughing because we were sort of talking about it, and I was laughing about it with my girlfriend, and we were just sort of saying like, oh, if only you guys sort of knew, because I have an iPod, like a classic iPod, which I actually probably listen to a lot of music on, probably more so than anything. I love the streamers; they're incredible and they're very engaging But I use my iPod predominantly actually for like listening to things that aren't on streamers, so like a demo or something that I'm working on, because I need to, like a big part of when you're working on a song is actively doing stuff on it, but then actually also kind of listening back to it, and that is just as crucial. And I find that going for a drive and driving and listening to the music, so you've got that visual or like audio visual sort of thing happening, is really helpful. So I bounce all of my demos or like parts onto this classic iPod. But I actually also on my iTunes have so many video game soundtracks, like an unbelievable amount. I've got all of the Mario ones and Metroid and like Zelda, and even some of like the 8-bit ones that are just melodically so incredible. I mean, you can hear the influence of that stuff in people like Thundercat, for example, or like I don't know, even like Aphex Twin, or obviously a lot of the electronic music. But the melodic sense is kind of incredible in a lot of that music, and I think it's also predominantly because like in places like Japan, where a lot of those games were being made. I mean, the video game industry was so stable; it was probably more stable than the music industry in some aspects. So a lot of people that end up writing music for there are a lot of them like classically trained or like jazz pianists or very skilled musicians, and so they'll put all of this, like I find, like for example, I don't know if you remember that game Contra, the Alien Wars, and the soundtrack is just like really proggy, like like polyrhythms and like modal jazz guitar solos, and you're like, oh my god, who wrote this? Like, very kind of technical, and it's all just on 16-bit, so it's quite funny, but it's good. It's amazing.
Well, like that 8-bit stuff, when the NES only had 4 audio channels and one had to be percussion, you only had 3. Usually 2 to 3 lines of melody. So everything had to be catchy. The bass line had to be catchy. So every part of it is hummable because you didn't have the luxury of 300 tracks or even like 8 or 24 where you could have something just be ambient. Everything had to be this super catchy kind of earworm. And then with the later stuff, like on the Genesis, it was an FM synth. So anytime it struggled trying to replicate certain sounds, but if you just wanted to sound like a rock band or a synth rock band, it sounded beautiful. Yeah,
I remember seeing this funny interview with Koji Kondo, and they were asking him like, because a lot of people sort of thought that maybe the Mario theme kind of had like the famous one had like a mariachi band,
Okay.
like influence, and you can kind of hear it. It does kind of sound like it could almost work as a mariachi, you know, with the brass line, like the rhythm of it. It has like that aspect to it. But he was just like, nah. It's like, what did you like? It's just funny that it's like that the first thing that you came up with. Like, it's so abstract. It's such an abstract melody, and it's amazing. Obviously, it's incredible, but I think it's just it's a real insight into his like obviously quite eccentric sort of personality, which is cool.
I like that he just shuts it down. No, next question.
Yeah, he was like, nah, not really. And they're like, where did you get the inspiration? He's like, I don't know. That's just what I did. That just is what came to my head. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing first brushstroke. You know, like that. You know?
And it's a melody that just has stuck around for so long that is so mainstream that a lot of people who haven't touched a video game for most of their life could probably recognize that in some way.
Yeah, if the video game industry had like a national anthem,
yeah,
that's probably it. Like if they were competing in the Olympics, and it's like now the video game industry like that, it's like what would start playing.
absolutely.
Everyone, yeah, fist pump.
You know, actually, some of our community had chimed in with theirs. Horky Sporky had said one he thought was an obvious pick was the save room in Resident Evil, which is similar to Last of Us, what I was talking about with that intensity and the calmness. Because Resident Evil, you're stuck in a mansion or wherever the game takes place.
Yeah.
Everything is trying to kill you. Everything is unknown. There's jump scares and really brooding kind of music, limited supplies, that kind of thing. It's everything about the game is trying to be difficult. And then when you get to a save room, it's always this beautiful, ambient, kind of spooky music, but really soft music. And there's a rule of no enemies can get into that save room. You have all the time in the world, and it's always a really, it's just, again, it's like a time where you can just completely relax. Usually for the first time in quite a while in those games.
Yeah, cool. We had Resident Evil 2, I think, on 64. But I was like, I think I was a bit too scared. I was like, too scared to play it. And it was like, I mean, video games for me are very, the first thing I think of is my brother, because he's like 2 years older than me. And he was the guy, he was really he was player one, you know. Mm-hmm. And I was like, normally sometimes holding a controller that wasn't plugged in.
Right.
You know, or just like, you know, just watching. I was like, just always kind of passively watching. But yeah, Resident Evil, it's a sick game. Very cool.
I tried to trade a guy for Final Fantasy VII when I was like a young teenager, or maybe younger, and he changed his mind at the last minute. Some like older guy. He felt like a million years old to me. I have no idea if he was only like 20, but and then he ended up giving me Resident Evil instead, and I just couldn't get through it. I was like, this is way too fright. I definitely couldn't play with the lights off.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. What are some other zones that you like think of?
One I had was in real-time strategy games like StarCraft, Warcraft, that kind of thing, Command and Conquer. When you're doing the single player, the campaign, and usually it's like different scenarios, like you've got to set up a base using only these minerals or whatever, or they're coming at you. And then when you've gotten over the challenge of that, and you know that I'm going to beat this level, and there's sort of like a ramp up of difficulty where you're trying to get all the resources before the enemy comes, and then you fight him, and then you realize, okay, now it's just cleanup time, and you can really take your time. Again, there's no time limit like most of the examples we have. You can just kind of meander. You can build whatever you want. You can build up this huge force and eventually kind of mow them down. But again, that tension's gone, and you can just sort of go and smash them with whatever you want. But I always really like those moments.
Yeah, that was we used to play Command and Conquer, like the original one, and then like Red Alert, and was it Tiberian Sun? And yeah, it's like, you know, when you've got your like harvesters getting the ore or whatever it is, and they're just like raking in this fake money. This stuff doesn't actually serve you outside of the game. It's really fun, just like watching that kind of money just like go up.
For the first, because usually for the first bit of the level, you're just waiting on how much money you can get. You're spending it as fast as you can, and then once you get to that end point, the money's going far beyond what you could even spend.
Yeah, and you're just kind of like building yourself. But maybe, I don't know whether this, and ignoring the money bit, but the idea of like just kind of building your base, and I mean it's very, I feel it's quite male, you know, it's just sort of like building blocks or sort of like building your army base. It's like very kind of, but it's like taking aside the fact that it's like it's a military kind of like based game. There's an element to that world building, or like, how would you describe it? Almost as like maintenance or something.
Right.
And I think of the you know, when you like rake the sand, like as a, you know, in the sort of in gardens to like make the like waved shapes of like, you know, sand gardens and stone gardens, where you're really just, you know, affecting your environment to kind of suit a certain sense of peace. And that's like another virtual space. I think also, you know, a lot of those kinds of games, like, you know, the sort of the aspect ratio of like the bird's eye view, like looking down on space and moving through it in that aspect, and being able to pick and kind of affect the environment, almost like in a like geometric kind of way. Like it's all about the space and the way things look, and, you know, oh, do I have enough of these things? Do I want more here? Do I want that? You know, and yeah, it has no end to it. It's just because, especially in those games, I think you could like just, you know, do a skirmish, which wasn't part of the actual levels. It's just like doing a skirmish, and that you can just kind of build your base till you fall asleep. You know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Or sort of like a Sim City or Civilizations, Minecraft. There are all these games where you're working towards something, so you can unlock the next level, so you can unlock the next level. There is no end, and you can just spend hours and hours, sort of as you say, like shaping it to the perfect whatever you have in your mind, you know. And that's kind of the Zen thing too, where you don't have to worry too much about, but it's just more of what do you want to do. It's a real, that sandbox element can be very peaceful.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I've never played Minecraft. I feel like maybe I was a bit too old when it's, not that I had, but like, just I didn't do it. I didn't do the thing. But it seems like there's actually a lot of what we're talking about in that game, from what I can understand of it, because it seems it's completely passive for the most part. And it seems like even amongst the game, there's like this very encouraging sort of culture of people just helping you out. If you need something, people often just help you out, and you just continue building and doing whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, I had I'm the same. I had never played it. I figured, not for me. This is maybe like a younger person thing. I got convinced to try it, and the first day I played it, I sort of like got hooked into the loop of it, and ended up playing something like 10 hours. And I had no idea I would be so into it. And all these people were just joining and helping and sharing their expertise. And yes, I can see the huge popularity of it. Eventually, I sort of bounced off, and I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad I tried it. But it's Terraria is similar to that, where it's a two-dimensional version and a lot to do with building, a little more objective based, whereas Minecraft feels way more floaty. It's more like, do you want to build a replica of the Taj Mahal? Do you just want to make a little hut?
Yeah, I see, like you see on Reddit, people are often sharing images of like something that they've made on Minecraft. I'm like, no, that actually looks like it would be pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and sometimes they spend months or years working on one of these projects.
Yeah, crazy.
One Leonot from our community, he had an idea from the modern game Death Stranding, And there's in that game you're delivering packages from place to place, and a lot of things in the world are trying to kill you. There's people trying to steal your packages. You're trying not to fall over because you're carrying these huge amounts. It's sort of like a balance game and like resource management. And sometimes the world will just open up and this black world is trying to like drag you under. So there's a lot of tension there. And then every once in a while there'll be this moment where the camera pans way out and a song will start playing, usually by this band called Low Roar, which is really similar to like Sigur Rós, or they're very ambient, like amazing epic stuff. And you know that while that song is playing, nothing's going to happen. And it's just you walking in the wilderness, enjoying the walk and enjoying the song. And you've got this uninterrupted 3 to 4 minutes of just like a music video that you're the star of. And it's a really cool idea, something that I don't think I've ever seen in a game before. And I hope to see more stuff like that going forward.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. What was that game that came out? I think it was like an Xbox game, and there was that guy. I think was it called Fez?
Okay, yeah, Fez is a game where you rotate the world around. You look at the different sides.
And the music was incredible.
By Disaster Piece.
Disaster Piece, yeah.
I have a video on our channel just going through that soundtrack. That's one of my favorite soundtracks. It feels, just listening to that album feels like you've gone on a huge adventure.
So I have that soundtrack because I think I bought it on his like Bandcamp. I've never even played the game. I just love his like music. And then there's another game that he did called Hyperlight Drifter.
Yeah.
That looks like I've never played it, but it looks incredible. And the music is it's kind of like an 8-bit version of the Blade Runner soundtrack.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
It's like 8-bit Vangelis. Very, very cool. And they definitely, I guess we might be moving off topic a little bit, but I guess, to broaden the theme of, Zen in the virtual space, but then also just kind of discussing the value of ambience in a game and vastness. I think you get that sense of immersion through the vastness when you feel like this huge vastness. And I think that's the same with anyone who might read fantasy books like Dune or anything I guess it's sci-fi but it's fantasy you can feel this sense of vastness to it.
Yeah, and having that space lets you feel the scale of it. Because if everything is just in your face and constantly right up against you the whole time, it eventually becomes kind of boring and you can get desensitized to it. So I think playing with those dynamics is really important.
And I know that, scientifically speaking, for the sake of mental health, it's really important for humans to spend some point of their day or their week looking at a horizon which is far away.
Right.
So it's important for your mental well-being to actually just see a sense of distance. And I lived in London for a long time, and I always thought that what was interesting with London is that it's very close. You can, in some areas, in some streets and things like that, you might be able to see, 500 yards ahead of you, but you probably won't be able to ever see much further unless you actually get out of London.
Right.
And then when you move, or if you get to North London, which is also, there's lots of hills there, and you can actually sort of see the cityscape, and you just instantly feel this yourself breathing, you're above it all, and it feels very zen. And I think there's that kind of, to create that kind of space in a video game is incredible, to even think of it in that way, in a virtual space. And it's remarkable that the designers do it.
About the Horizon thing, that's interesting because I worked on cruise ships for a while playing music, and it was so important to get out onto the deck and look out at the ocean. And there's something about seeing that horizon that is so far away that sort of lets your mind process it in a way that goes, the world is vast, your problems are not. Anything that is on your mind that is weighing you down is much smaller than what you see before you. And when you're stuck in a small room staring at a screen or the same thing over and over again, it can really feel like those the things in your head, the weight on the shoulders can feel a lot more important than it really is. So that's interesting about that being broken down in a scientific way. Makes perfect sense.
We are all temporary. Everything is temporary except the horizon.
Ah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for the idea for this and for sharing the music.
Thank you.
The album is called The Sundog LP by Golf Alpha Bravo. This is your debut solo album. Vinyl is available through Instagram and Facebook. We'll have links for Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
The whole shooting match.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm so glad. I was almost going to suggest we talk about video game music, but I thought, you know what, maybe it might be a little bit not that it's uninteresting, but it could be a bit obvious, being a musician. And I was like, no, I just want to throw this out there and see if this sounds insane or not, or if people actually kind of understand. But I think they do, and I think it would be cool, for more people to be sort of outspoken about that aspect of what they enjoy in playing games, and that ambience, and miss playing the game, not for the sake of beating it or 100%ing it, but actually just to enjoy the walking around or whatever it might be.
Well, there was an example we didn't get to, but you had mentioned in the email, was going off the track in Mario Kart.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And
that was that's like a funny thing to do. I used to do it all the time. Like, you go in to play like a verse level or something like that, and sometimes it would be really just to try and like get the corners right, so I could like do, defeat probably my brother. Like he'd just always be better than me. So I have to like put the hours in by myself, just doing time trial after time trial. But then eventually I'd be like, you know what, forget this. I'm gonna just drive off. And is it that one? I think it's called like Calamari Desert or something on Mario 64, or Mario Kart 64. And there is like a vastness to it. It's the one with like the train. And I just always used to just drive off and see where the background, like see where the game ends, because they always have this kind of very like tempting background, like mountains or something like that, and it's unattainable. Like you can't ride your like go-kart to it, but it's there, and that was always a fun thing to do.
Well, because I mean, the whole point of the game is to go as fast as you can forward. Like as fast as you can, only slowing down when absolutely necessary to make a turn. So it is such a crazy feeling to get off the track and no longer have this pull forwards where the game wants you to go and just explore around, because there's so many things that are just designed to be seen as you go by. They might even be these like flat 2D images that look fine when you're driving, and then you can go explore and go around them and see that these are like cardboard cutouts, like this isn't even real. And
that's such a funny, like the crowds or whatever, and you realize it's just a flat animation. You're like, none of this is real.
All right, man. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really enjoyed it.